Every single person in America, every single person in North America, South America, Eurasia, Africa, Antarctica, Oceania, they all know the name Dick Tracy. And every single one of them have, outside of their home, a bucket or a basket filled to the brim of memorabilia that they set on fire. We're here in a backyard, and this is exactly what I was talking about. You have your buckets and your baskets, your cylinders, anything that people were able to fill objects that were Dick Tracy related. Well, let's take a quick peek around. See what we got. We've got a Dick Tracy record. I don't know why this didn't burn. It's made out of paper. It's possible it's dragon proof, fireproof. You could listen to Dick Tracy music on those. We've got a Dick Tracy. This is the head of a Dick Tracy doll in mint condition. These were highly collectible. There's still sold on eBay. They were sold on eBay even in the 60s. Very good condition. This is a Dick Tracy lunchbox, a child's lunchbox they would take to school. This one isn't a Dick Tracy lunchbox. Could have been mistaken as one because it was yellow. I don't think there was a Care Bear burn pile going on. But there you have it. Some great Dick Tracy examples of the carnage. You want me to start with the early stuff or the stuff people know about, care about? Well, the 20s is when we first started developing some of these Tracy characters, and you'll notice that a lot of our characters during that time period were able to crouch down into little balls, like Boy Tumble and Spring Peeper. They had the ability to get down very, very small, and the reason behind that was a lot of the coal miners in northeastern Pennsylvania were writing into us, and they were telling us, oh, could you please design a character that I could be like, that I could strive to be like, somebody who has a job where they do very, very tiny activities. And we set our artists to work to develop these characters that could flip and shrink and tumble. Boy Tumble is wearing a helmet to protect his head. He would take a lot of blows to the head. And again, you'll notice that some of our characters don't have any shoes, and that was we would always listen to our readers and our writers, not the writers on staff, but the writers who were writing into us. And they would say, oh, I don't have any shoes. Could you please write a character that I could identify with. And sure enough, the next time they read the paper, there would be a couple of characters without any shoes on their feet.
So at the time, we had been doing the twin thing for a while. There was the Venn sisters, there were the Marmalade twins, and we wanted to do something new and different that hadn't been tried before. So we thought, well, what's one further than twins? And it is triplets. So we decided on triplets, and yet that wasn't, it didn't seem like we were pushing it enough. So we figured, well, what's something that could set these triplets apart? And that was remove something from them. You know, we're adding one sibling. We're gonna step back and take something away. And what we decided to remove was their eyesight. So now we had these 3 blind triplets. I think it had been decided early on that they would be male, but then there was the question of who would take care of them. They're blind, and remember this was the 1930s, and the thought of blind people taking care of themselves was a little, I'm stuck. It's really shallow here. So we came up with a caretaker called Sister Brood. Brood in the sense, like an insect brood, you know. So it's never really certain, is she the mother? Is she their fleshly sister? Or is it sister in a sense that she's maybe a nun in a convent? Or at the time, nurses were also called sister. Or is she biologically their sister? It's never explained. Well, in the animated series that came out in 1987, she is revealed to be their mother. And but that series was after Joe Bocconi left Dick Tracy, and that series is not considered, by true Tracy heads, that's not considered canon. There was an attempt to make a movie in the later 90s and to kind of reconcile what happened on the 80s series and kind of bring it back into canon, but after Joe died, that it just seemed disrespectful to go forward with that project. Why are they so small? That's what I want to know. Why are the blind lads so small?
We would always collaborate on different characters. That's just the way that we worked at Dick Tracy. We'd get all of our writers, all of our animators, and we would round table. Oh, what do you think? This guy here, should he have should you be able to see his ears? We going traditional style with the ears? How many fingers? 4 or 5? And you know, and then Mary comes in with, oh, we have just a regular gangster, and come. You know what that is? So we'd have a gangster, and she'd put her hand on top of his body and start tracing her fingers to give the gangster 5 fingers attached to his back and butt. It wasn't even Thanksgiving. It was just, now this guy has a... But we had to let her do it, because that's the way that we worked. So that's how we got Tommy Gun Turkey. which is a good name, and I literally just thought of that second. But back then, it was a good one.
Fathers and Rags. Not sure where to begin. It's a long story. So the year is 1932, and the popularity of the Dick Tracy series has started to wane. People weren't as interested in yellow-hatted detectives or protagonists any longer. And remember, this is decades before the Man in the Yellow Hat and Curious George makes you start to see a renaissance of yellow hats in literature. At the time, 1932, the most popular character in media are Mickey Mouse and his wife. So even though we are at Dick Tracy Studios rolling out villain after villain, you see Salad Eater and Chore Face and Klepto-Bismol and all these great characters and villains and bad guys, they're all human. That's not what people want. It's not what any of us want. They want to see mice. This is before World War II, and people want to see mice. So how do you compete with that? Well, you also do it. So we've made a husband and mouse, husband and wife, mouse team of villains, Fathers and Rags. And the idea was they would sit under chairs and try to grab the feet of Dick Tracy's infant son. And that was okay. We were all excited about it, and all the cartoonists were in the studio designing hats and purses for our mice characters. And then one cartoonist, Joe Piccone I think it was, puts on a Third Eye Blind album. And that was kind of like the moment when a light bulb appeared in the air, and I thought to myself, well, who's singing all these great music of this album? And it's not a mouse, it's a regular one. And so I thought to myself, suppose one of these villains of this in this marriage bond is human. So we decided to make Fathers a human male. So now you had a human and mouse that were married to one another. And it was exciting because that was the first interspecies legally married couple in comics. Now, they're Goofy and the cow were also a couple at that time, which is stupid because, first of all, cow just means female animal. Literally, that's what it means. You know, there's no reason to assume that she would be bovine. But they're not married. They're just living together in sin. So it was very important for us to demonstrate, to show to the audience that Fathers and Rags, their marriage was legal. And so actually every strip that they are featured in begins with their wedding and their misadventures with Dick Tracy are actually anecdotes shared in the toast, in the best man toast at their reception. What's interesting about that actually is that is where the tradition of the best man toast comes from, because before that the best man at the wedding would stay completely silent and kind of sneak around and during the wedding so that the bride wouldn't get spooked.
Mary said what about Goofy? Mary said what about Goofy? Oh, Mary wouldn't know Goofy if she was standing right in front of him and he was wearing his traditional bone hat. You know, this whole documentary is just making me remember why I gave up Dick Tracy and just vanished into obscurity. There were a lot of conflicting moments. I have to tell you, I will tell you, with the creation of Itchpants Gowdy. And Itchpants Gowdy created, she didn't even mention this, did she? He was created in the 1930s, while Bothers and Rags was being created, and Itchpants Gowdy, possibly influenced by the success of Mickey Mouse, but more in the popularity of Dippy Dog. Dippy Dog, more recognizable in his Goofy form. Now, Itchpants Gowdy has that same bump that Dippy Dog has. I think he still has it. He usually covers it up. But Itchpants Gowdy, he would use this bump as kind of an echolocation, similar to a bat creature or a beluga whale, and he was very good. That's how he would commit all of his crimes, using this echolocation. And the only difference was he would use it for evil, where I don't think that beluga whales or bats use theirs for more. It's just for finding food, mosquitoes. But Itchpants Gowdy, he would find his treasures and immediately get caught. He would get caught in every single strip. 3-panel, 6-panel, 8-panel, didn't matter. He would get caught. And usually the 3 panels, it would just him being caught automatically. He would use it in his echolocation in the first panel, and then second panel he's caught. The third panel is just him behind bars. No, I'm not surprised she didn't mention how Itchpants Gowdy was created. A lot of turmoil, because I would wear Itchy Pants to the studio where we were working, and I think that a lot of the workers, the animators, the writers were allergic to wool, and I was there wearing these very, very itchy pants that a lot of the dust and fibers would come off while I was wearing them. I don't think that she took kindly to that. She had a huge reaction, and that was just the beginning of the end of our relationship. But at least we got Itchy Pants Gowdy out of it. So it was kind of a double-edged sword. I never liked the character of Itchy Pants Gowdy because it went through so many transitions, and I think that one of the designers was just making fun of me in my itchy pants. But I didn't realize that until the animated series in 1987, when they were blatantly mocking me and they even used my name. I think that one of the writers was the voice of Itchy Pants Gaudian doing a terrible imitation of me. It wasn't nice. They weren't nice people to work with.
Your original Itchy Pants are in the Dick Tracy Museum now. I was hospitalized for several months after a particularly bad day when Joe wore the pants at the studio. And I'm not bitter about it. I mean, remember, this was 1932. Animators and cartoonists, we got our bumps and bruises, our scrapes and bruises, cuts and bruises, our arms were, and that was just part of it just kind of came with the territory of working in a full-time animation studio that drew comic strips. It was just part of the deal. I mean, we were climbing ladders, falling off ladders, and falling off grandfather clocks. Our one head illustrator, Nathan Crescenda, he was the golden boy. He could churn out 5-10 Tracy villains a night, and they were all bestsellers. A lot of nephews, and he was a nephew of someone, and I think that's why he had such an understanding of youth culture. But we used to call him the xylophone. I mean, he was in and out of the hospital all the time, broken this, fractured that.
I don't want to do this documentary. I've had more than a few problems working with the people at Dick Tracy.
I was just, that was the life. Grunge music was kind of on its way out. And, but everyone wanted to work at Dick Tracy. People would stop you and, you work at Dick Tracy. Everyone wanted to draw that hat, to get a chance to work on that gallery of villains. And so, no, I'm not bitter. And, we drew inspiration from all parts of life. When I was in the hospital, the patient next to me was getting his rat face removed. And, that was the inspiration of Curly Sue, the original Rat Man. Here's this human man, right? So here's the thing. I didn't realize until the 90s when the Dick Tracy movie, live action movie, was in the works. I didn't realize anyone ever considered Curly Sue a rodent character. Because, of course, we already had rodents. We had Bothers and we had Rags. And Bothers originally actually was a mouse. Not most people don't know that. But Rags, 100% a mouse woman. Curly Sue, it just has a mouse shape, rat shaped nose, and that's how he gets the name the Rat Man. But the ears are typical, no tail. That's an important feature that he actually used a lot in criminal behavior. When they started casting the live action movie, and it went to that point, they were casting when it got to the point of Curly Sue, when they were looking for an actor to play him. They said, well, let's do CGI, which was a new thing at the time. And I was thinking, wait, CGI? This is Dick Tracy. This is Dick Tracy. There's not a computer that we have. So, I mean, it was, talk about, right. So, and it wasn't until that point when I thought, oh, people think that the Rat Man, Curly Sue, is a rat man. And I can see why they would think that. But he's a human. He was never... We already had rodents. I wouldn't have... I kind of wish I'd never created him. So I'm not mad at Joe. But it's fine.
Mary would come up with these characters. Curly Sue. I thought it was another rat. She came up with that bothers and rags. It's like another rat. Here we go, another rat. And Curly Sue comes along. Here we go again.
Those were tough times at Tracy Studios. It was about 1985, 1986, and we were all preparing for the animated series. But Joe, something changed for him, I guess. He was kind of obsessing with whatever was popular, you know, whatever movies or cartoons that kids were into. And I think that he felt that Dick Tracy should still be, you know, the big thing and deserve all that recognition. And we all felt that way. But Joe would start to design characters like Joe Skeletor, Star Wars Keith, E.T. Boy, Captain Garfield. And when we would suggest, you know, maybe these are too influenced by other properties, he would get really agitated and combative, and he would throw brushes and splash his ink at people and knock over drawing tables and knock over grandfather clocks. And he would claim that they were his characters and that he had designed them back in the 40s and had to give them up because of the war effort. And I think he really believed what he was saying. To prove it, he would bring out a stack of blank pieces of paper and drop them all on the table in the big writer's room. And he would take out a pen and sketch Star Wars Keith, and then he would sign it Joe Piccone, 1941. And, you know, one day, towards the end, he came into the studio and locked himself in his office. And every few hours, he would slide out from under the door a drawing of Alf. And we'd say, Joe, we can't use this. And he would holler, this is my character. This is not Alf. This is my character. He likes soup. You know, he's different. And then 3 days later, he comes out, puts on his hat, gets his briefcase, and he says, I'm going out. Does anyone need anything? And we never saw him again. And in his office, his itchy pants were draped over his easel with a painting of Tough Guy Mattel, who became the biggest Dick Tracy villain in history. And it wasn't till his funeral, years later, that his funeral was a really big deal. There were a lot of celebrities there, and I don't think we ever realized just how many lives that he had touched. And a man came up to give a eulogy, and he took a piece of paper from his shirt pocket and unfolded it, and it was a letter, and it said, Dear Stevie, I know you were very brave when you got your tonsils out. I hope you're getting a lot of ice cream and that you feel better. I made this character for you. His name is Elliot. I designed a shirt for him. It is red, it has a zipper and a hood, and a place to hide your bubble gum. Love, Uncle Joe. was a boating accident. No, they never found his body.
Sorry. I have a blood infection. No, I don't have any drama in my life anymore. None. And it's all because I left Dick Tracy. I left it all behind and I don't think about it anymore at all. And that's funny because that's all I used to think about. Oh, I gotta pump out another villain. Oh, gotta pump out another villain. And the thing that bothered me most was I would create these villains and then nobody even knows about them. You know, the names: Flat Top, Prune Face, Big Boy, The Influence, Fly Face. These are big name guys. And do you know who knows who Fly Face is? Huh? My granddaughter. She knows who Fly Face is. Does she know who any of my characters? Does she know who Star Wars Keith is? No. When I mention Star Wars Keith, she thinks I'm talking about Star Wars, Keith, my grandson, Keith. And that's another thing that gets me, is that I create Star Wars Keith, and then there's a movie that comes out, Star Wars, in the 1970s. I created Star Wars Keith in the 1950s. And he was based off of a friend of mine who was in his 50s, who he liked to read. He read and read Star Wars Keith. He was always reading about stars and wars. And he would read and read until his eyes would get bags under them. He was based on a real person. And I was like, Star Wars Keith, do you mind if I create this character after you? And he didn't mind. But I do mind that Star Wars took my name, his name, and who knows how much money they made. But I never saw those movies. I don't know if they're about Star Wars Keith or not, but I don't think so, because Star Wars Keith, you wouldn't want a movie about him.
Cornron was created for the television, the Dick Tracy Variety Hour. A lot of those characters at the time were created for the guest host to play. You know who was playing Dick Tracy originally, was going to, Burt Ward. And then he went off to the other show, which I think was a step down, because he went from playing the, number one, star of the show to, the fifth or sixth most recognizable character in the, I'll just say, the other show. So Cornron was created for Davy Jones to play, and I got to meet Davy Jones. I was not a fan of the Monkees. No, I didn't care for their music. I thought their whole shtick was kind of a rip-off of the Venn sisters, and that, Michael Nesmith's knit hat, and talk about pretentious. My mom invented whiteout. All of our moms invented whiteout. That's called breast milk. Okay, so I was a fan of the way that they sort of moved through space when they would link arms, kind of in their hands. I got to meet Davy Jones at the fitting for his costume, and he was an incredibly small human, alarmingly small. So the Cornron's horn, when they first brought it out to fit him, it was like a dunce cap or one of those medieval princess hats, a high steeple hennin. And so they'd have to take it back to the shop, and they'd whittle it down, and they'd bring it back, and it would still be too big, and then they'd whittle it down, and it was, and it just, he was in the makeup chair for hours and hours, and he couldn't move or get out of the chair because of the glue on his head. But what a lovely, patient, never complained, wonderful, miniature individual. And so those characters, those villains, we never gave them backstories. They were kind of one-off. If you ask me what Cornron's gimmick was, I don't care. The rules for what you were allowed to say or show on television in the late 60s were very different than today. And you couldn't say criminal or crime or the word police or arrest or that's illegal. But what you could show in terms of violence and gore was kind of brutal even for today's standards. So, for example, we'd have a sketch where a salad eater would have one of those, what's the white carrot? Parsnip, sharpened at the end, and he'd be standing over a victim and just, gouging their stomach. And there was a veterinarian consultant on set, and so it was very realistic. And then Dick Tracy would burst in the room and say, "What are you up to?" "Making trouble, I see," and something like that. And like, "Oh, no, thank you." And that's where Dick Tracy's catchphrase, "No, thank you," comes from. We all had one of those. Did you have one of those pool dolls what do they call it? The doll with the pull string, and you drop back and it would say, "Oh, no, thank you," or "That's pesky, I don't care for that," or "How do you think that makes me feel?" We didn't get paid in those days, but we got a discount on all the merch.
Dick Tracy the musical. Dick Tracy the musical. Dick Tracy the musical. Oh, Dick Tracy the musical. I haven't thought about that in years. Dick Tracy the musical. Dick Tracy the musical started off, I think, in the 1900s, early 1900s, 1905. And what's really incredible about Dick Tracy the musical is that we've had the same actor playing Dick Tracy this entire time. And it's a woman. It's Mary Martin, who played Peter Pan in the Peter Pan musical. And we had to get Mary Martin. If anybody's going to play Peter Pan, they have to also play Dick Tracy. And I could have said that wrong, but why we wanted Mary Martin, not only was she used to being in the harnesses and she was used to the high flying, which we wanted Dick Tracy to be doing stunts and jumping off of buildings and flying around into the audience and high-fiving the children. We wanted that, but we also didn't want it to be clear if Dick Tracy is male or female, and Mary Martin already captured that with Peter Pan, so we thought, oh, well, who's better than Mary Martin to do that? Gotta get the same one who did Peter Pan, the musical. So we got Mary Martin. Doesn't matter to us what's going on underneath the trench coat. What really matters is what's going on underneath the fedora up there, which is Dick Tracy's brain, and that's how he catches all the bad guys. And Dick Tracy the musical was all about the bad guys, so they desperately needed us and our team of cartoonists because we were creating bad guys specifically for the musical, and they also wanted us to write the songs for the musical, which is unheard of, but that's the way that things were. We did things a little differently at Dick Tracy, and we didn't mind.
It was a text-based adventure game developed by Sierra, of course, and it had a lot of kind of high fantasy elements, so it wasn't, I mean, you played as Dick Tracy, but, you know, instead of the final boss being Flat Top, I think it was like the Harpy Queen was the final boss. So I kind of got the impression that it had been developed as a standalone game, and then it was kind of they kind of forced it into a Dick Tracy game, because there weren't a lot of detective, you know, you weren't really doing a lot of detective work. It was more like answering riddles, which I guess detective work is answering riddles. But I mean, you had to collect ingredients for potions and stuff, which I mean, I guess detectives do send things off to the lab. So maybe, I guess that does make sense. It was a difficult game, though. I never got very far in it, because instead of commands like, you know, open the door, use key, it was very, very specific. So it was, you know, notice door, and then learn about doors. You had to actually, your Dick Tracy had to learn, you know, it was like, I think the premise was it was his first day on Earth, and he was just learning how things worked. And, you know, when you wanted to walk, it wasn't just walk towards table, it was move right foot forward, move left foot forward, move right foot forward, left foot forward. Something that they did that, and I think that they included this because of the whole vitamin scandal, was, and so if you remember in a lot of the text-based games, if you were to type in a command that included some kind of salty language, the computer would kind of playfully say like, oh, does your mom know you say that, or something like that. What the Dick Tracy game did was it actually would print a screenshot of your command with whatever, you know, swear word you typed in, and would fax that to your parents' work. So parents liked that. Children did not like that. The game was not successful for that reason also. And it didn't really have the flavor of a Dick Tracy comic strip, which I never read the comic strips. I've actually never read a Dick Tracy comic before. But as far as I know, it's not based in kind of a fantasy realm. Although I loved that. I was a huge Tolkien head, a huge Bilbo Frodo head, Gimli, and help me, Aragorn, help me. What's weird is when you look back, when we read The Lord of the Rings, when they were first published, his name was Argonon. But when you look back at the original books, it's Aragorn now. I just think that's so cool how they did that.
So you probably want to hear about the worst time in my life, the worst time to be alive, the worst time to be at Dick Tracy Studios. That's why you're doing this, right? This is what you're here for. And you know what I'm going to say. You know already. The year was 1979. 1979. Had nothing to do with the Smashing Pumpkins song, although that song was very influential to a couple of our characters later on in the 90s. I don't think that song was about the events of Dick Tracy. I'm not sure what that song is about, but I don't think it had anything to do with Dick Tracy. 1979, and we were working for a company that made vitamins. And this company, they didn't contact us. They didn't do any research about who Dick Tracy is as a detective, as a person. They didn't, I don't think they even knew. They just see the yellow. They're like, oh, he's yellow. Let's make these yellow vitamins. And they go to work. They're like, we have this great idea for a jingle. We're like, okay, that has nothing to do with us. We gave them a stack of paper. This is who Dick Tracy is. And I don't think they read it. So sure enough, the commercial comes on, 1979. We are Tracy kids. We know more than mom. We are Tracy kids. We know more than mom. We are Tracy kids. We know more than mom. And that, it completely ruined us. Because at the time, this is when mothers were doing the majority of the shopping. These little kids were running around their mothers singing, we know more than mom, we know more, getting higher and higher. We know, with these devilish grins on their faces, we know more than mom. The mothers began to riot and walk the streets and picket, and soon they started burning all of their merchandise, all of their children's merchandise, and their own Dick Tracy merchandise, and their husbands. They weren't burning their husbands, they were burning their husbands' Dick Tracy merchandise. And there were bonfires everywhere, people gathering up all of their Dick Tracy, the Dick Tracy records, Dick Tracy stamps, the velveteen Dick Tracy pull-string dolls. You could hear them in the fire. You could hear them screaming. These dolls. No, thank you. No, thank you. They were screaming for help. No, thank you. How do you think this makes me feel? It's pitiful. How do you think this makes me feel? Huh? This isn't what I want. It was... they were burning... They'd carry boxes of the Dick Tracy... the wristbands, the slap bracelets, the Dick Tracy pogs. They were all just set to fire. We were ruined. We didn't think that we could ever bounce back after that. The Dick Tracy banks, we had these cast iron banks. I mean, grandparents, grandmothers were so upset. The kids were the ones with the devilish grins as they sang, we know more than mom, but the grandmothers and the mothers, they were the ones with the devilish grins as they were burning the cast iron banks from the 20s. And Heaven Jones banks and Heaven Jones soakies with the shampoo inside. The shampoo's still inside. Dump the shampoo out first. That's not flammable. it was all gone. We didn't know what to do, but what do you do in a situation like that? We thought, well, let's just start from scratch. We tried a couple of different spin-offs for adults to try and win back the mothers and the grandmothers and the aunts who they were mothers. The aunts were also mothers because we know more than mom. And it goes without saying the grandmothers were also moms.
The game show was so much fun. It was called Double Dick, and the contestants were siblings, a brother and a sister from each team, and they would answer Dick Tracy trivia questions, like, it might be like, which Dick Tracy villain died in prison awaiting his trial. And after a few rounds, the winners, brother and sister, would get taken out into a field where there was this massive, I guess, like an effigy, I don't know what the word would be, a labyrinth, I guess, a giant Dick Tracy laying out on a field, right, with his mouth open, and the children would be given a time limit to run around, in and out of his pockets of his trench coat, and they could go, in the ear canal and his mouth and down his throat and through the chambers of the heart. And they were looking for these 7 yellow flags that were hidden, maybe in his nose or anywhere, and they were searching for them, and at any moment they might turn a corner into like a lung, and there would be like one of the, like, Garfunkel's apple would appear, and he would chase them and like throw bags of money at them and try to capture them. And it was just a lot of fun. I actually got to play Dr. Mayvu in a few different episodes, but I was hiding in the hippocampus, and so no one ever went in there. You'd never saw me on the camera. I was just hiding. But that was great, and that really is what saved the company, that saved the studio. And after that, we were back in business. Like the song Back in Business from the Dick Tracy movie, which they never made.
Dick Tracy cereal. The Dick Tracy serial killer. Yeah, I probably should have mentioned him when we were talking about the worst time to be working at Dick Tracy. That was probably up there for sure. I don't know if it was the worst for us, though. It was probably really bad for the Dick Tracy, the Dick Tracy serial killer was probably really bad for him, and probably really bad for all of the people that he murdered. But we benefited greatly by the Dick Tracy serial killer. We were selling papers and strips. People used to just buy the strips separately from the paper. They would buy those. We were selling them like hotcakes. And the Dick Tracy serial killer, he was copying the bad guys in the comics and finding ways to end people's lives by killing them in the same way that the Dick Tracy villains would kill people in the comic strip. The serial killer, let me think about some of these ways that this serial killer would end people's lives. There was one time where he copied Heaven Jones. I'm sorry I keep bringing up Heaven Jones. He's the first one that I just always think of Heaven Jones whenever you guys ask me. Heaven Jones. He actually wrote a note to St. Peter after he destroyed that person. He left a note, which was very sadistic. There was the time where this serial killer went after somebody in the style of the remarkable nymph, and what the remarkable nymph would do is he would blow these bubblegum bubbles and just suffocate people inside the bubble. So this serial killer, they would find all of this Bazooka Joe bubblegum wrapping around these bodies, all of these bodies, and they're like, oh, I guess that one's the remarkable nymph. And the police would come to our studio and they would say, which character is this? Do you think this is a copycat? Do you think this is the real deal? Is this based off of one of your creations? And sometimes they weren't. Sometimes it was just a coincidence that somebody would be death by bubblegum. Because the serial killer would only do one of the villains. He would do it one time. And then he was on to his next bad guy, copycat. The bad guy. There were copycat killers, but this guy wasn't a copycat. He was just copying the Dick Tracy villains. Oh, one of my favorites that he killed. He killed somebody in the style of Pooch Fist. There were a lot of like puppy dog bite marks, and he must have gotten a puppy dog skull to make all the marks on the body. But I don't know if he read that comic that Pooch Fist was in, because those puppies never bit anybody. They were just there. They had the yelping, which would Dick Tracy would cover his ears up at the sound of the yelping, and then Pooch Fist was able to get away. What's another one that... what about... Oh, well, they did eventually catch the Dick Tracy serial killer. And this is just embarrassing for me, because it was Itchy Pants Gowdy. Itchy Pants Gowdy, the serial killer was caught by the police, and he just left a note that said, I'm being caught like how Itchy Pants Gowdy always gets caught. And I mean, I know that they're making fun of the creator of Itchy Pants Gowdy. I had my hand in him, but I didn't create Itchy Pants Gowdy, and I think that they were just making fun of me. And so for him to get caught like that, it's like, oh, well, I'm not the killer. So it was, the police were like, are you the Tracy serial killer? I was like, no, there was a joke by these guys in here. Haha. Now they wanted me to get arrested. I don't know if one of the writers was the Dick Tracy serial killer. That would have been really mean if they did all that just to make fun of me. I'm so glad I don't work there anymore, to tell you the truth. If I'm telling you the truth.
It was such a bad show. It was a really bad show, and in hindsight, which was a villain created for the series, in hindsight, we should have just stopped what we were doing and focused on finding Joe Piccone and bringing him back. But, you know, the animation was really cheap. You know, we sent it overseas to be animated, you know, across the pond, the other pond to Asia. And I think the Asian animators were not familiar enough with detective culture. So, like, there'd be a scene where all the villains would be, you know, down in the sewer eating pizza, but the pizza they'd be eating it backwards. They'd animate it, you know, them eating it crust first, which is not how it's done. And there was a lot of, you know, you'd see a character talking, like you'd see Old Maid Aroma, her lips would be moving, but the voice you would hear would be Heaven Jones. So, you know, she'd open her mouth and you'd hear, "I'm looking down from my cloud, and I choose you to die today." That was an interesting character, Heaven Jones, because he was a baby, but he was like an adult too. He was a baby that had died before being baptized, so he was stuck in limbo, and he would kind of use that, his position on a cloud, as a vantage point so he could, you know, plan his heists. I was uncomfortable with that, you know. I thought that was inappropriate for a children's series, but, you know, I was not uncomfortable with the murder, because, you know, I'd rather the children learn about murder from us than from, you know, whatever else, you know, other entertainment that was available to children at the time. You know, like, oh, my guy went down a pipe and a mushroom guy killed him, or got chomped by a plant, but he's okay. Here he is. He's back again. You know, like, in the long run, what's more detrimental? I don't know. But so Heaven Jones was, at the same time, the youngest and the oldest Dick Tracy villain. And that was a trivia question that would pop up from time to time in the game show Double Dick. Family Double Dick. But he would sit on a cloud and look down and, you know, see, you know, when the security guards were changing shifts and things like that. So, and he was the only Dick Tracy villain that was never caught, because he could jump in between planes, you know, the living and the planes and the dead. But we had planned this finale where Dick Tracy would sacrifice himself and actually enter into the realm of the dead, into the spirit realm, to capture Heaven Jones. But the studio execs at Dick Tracy were like, "No, you can't kill off Dick Tracy. You can't do that." But talk about hypocrisy, because, you know, years later, who did they kill off? Archie. So Archie could go to the, you know, spirit realm and track down the ghost of Jughead and vanquish him. I mean, and Jughead's hat situation, the felt crown thing he wore, also from Dick Tracy. That is the exact hat that Dick Tracy's love interest wears. Sometimes Dick Tracy's cousin would be on the show. Those are my favorite episodes. His cousin would wear a red hat, and he was all gray, and his name was Dumb Tracy, and I didn't sign off on that. But another example of the inconsistency in the animation. Sometimes he was a dog, and sometimes he'd be human. But it was a terrible show.
How does she do this? Does she say how she does this? Did you ever go to the beach and walk along the boardwalk and you see the shops that they have at the beach? And they have things inside those stores that they don't sell anywhere else. They have these really beautiful boxes, these little cages that have these things in them. These little things. I don't know what they are. They're these little things, and there are aquatic rocks in the boxes, these cages, and the aquatic rocks could be different colors, fluorescent colors, blue, beautiful boxes with these aquatic rocks, and they're these little things inside, and they sell them and you could buy them. But the thing about these little, whatever they are, they're a little thing. They have these shells, and they keep growing. These little things, these little whatever they are, they keep growing, and they have to find a new shell, but they can't find it in that beautiful box that they're in. You have to get it for them. You have to find a shell that's big enough for these little things, these little whatever they are. And they walk around on the aquatic rocks, and they make these sounds. And that's what I want to be. That's what I want. Eventually, I want to get to the point where I'm a little, whatever it is. It's a little thing. It's a little, whatever it is. It's a little, and it walks in a little box, a little aquatic rocks. And I want that. I want somebody to have me in a little beautiful box, and I could walk around on the aquatic rocks and have them find a shell for me. I don't have to find the shell anymore. I keep growing and growing, and they find the shell for me. And that's all. That's what I want to be. I want to be that little whatever it is. I don't know what it's called, but somebody else would find the shell for me. It's not about Dick Tracy, but that's, if you were wondering, that's what I would like.
Did he say he wanted someone to find him a shell to grow into? Did he know what it was called? I retired a couple years ago after being at the studio since I was a 7-year-old kid. I'd been drawing chalk drawings on the sidewalk and on the bricks of the building, mean pictures of cartoonists I saw going in and out, and the door popped open and Nathan Crisanda peeks out, and I thought I was going to get in trouble. He goes, "Hey kid, do you want to come inside and do that?" And then that's how I got a job. Not a job where I earned money, but like a job because I was doing what they told me to do. And it was great. I never had to go to school again. In the early 20s, people didn't know that school was important for kids, or they didn't really keep track of children. So they built the Dick Tracy Museum 4 years ago, and they wanted to do something special for the opening ceremony. And at that point, I was the only original cartoonist that was still working there. So they wanted to make my sort of retirement, my send-off, I guess, part of the ceremony. It was time for me to go. That's what they said. Derek and Jared and the new gang. I didn't want to retire. Dick Tracy Studios was my home. It was we all lived there. We would get up, we'd crawl out of our bunks in the morning and splash water on our faces. And then we'd slide down the fire pole, and we would just start drawing villains every day. And then on Christmas, we'd get a new bottle of ink. We were all there. It was Nathan and Stumps and both Lenny's and Danny. He was Navajo. And Joe. And I loved it. Every second of it. Even the bad days. Even the scary times when we had all the yellow jackets. They gave me one of those cast iron mechanical piggy banks. It was the one where you put the coin in and the coin rolls down the arms of Heaven Jones, and then he puts it in his mouth, and then there's the Dick Tracy across from him, and the Dick Tracy cocks his gun back and shoots him. The trench coat had rusted off, but I got tetanus from it. I work at Carmen San Diego now, but in the cafeteria. Sometimes I used to draw when somebody would order a fountain drink. I would sketch a little villain on the cup, but they asked me to stop doing that because they said that's not what we pay you for. And that's true. I think technically that's time theft. Time thief. I wonder if anyone ever designed that. See, I can't stop. But sometimes at the end of the day, though, I'll take one of the soft pretzels. If they don't sell it, they throw it away, so I'll kind of grab one. Actually, can you edit that part out? I don't want to. Pretzel burglar. See?
Straw that broke the camel's hump. Probably when right before the animated series, when I was working on a character named Sunny So Suspicious. And Sunny So Suspicious was this character. He had a powdered wig on, and he was always up to something. Sunny So Suspicious. He was slightly modeled after the Batman comics. There was a character called the Joker, and he had a catchphrase that was, "Why so suspicious?" And this character was Sunny So Suspicious. And so that was a little bit of inspiration from the DC universe. Sunny So Suspicious had on his foot a little mouse. And he was just there, was calling for a little mouse to be added to this character. He would hop around on one foot, and the mouse would rest in the fold that he had on his skin. A little skin flap there that the mouse would rest in. So I'd draw this character up, and somebody came over to me and they were like, "Oh, a mouse, huh?" And I said, the drawing was calling for it. The drawing was calling for this mouse. Sunny So Suspicious. And this person was saying, "I've had all these mice in the past," and calling me out for stealing their idea about having a rodent character involved in the mafia. And I didn't even think of it. It didn't even cross my mind. I was like, oh, well, this Sonny So Suspicious is calling for this mouse character to be added to his footfold. Has nothing to do with Bothers and Rags. Has nothing to do with that. The assistant. So, Sonny So Suspicious was never used. He's this character that never showed up in any form. This is his debut. This is the first time you're seeing this character, Sonny So Suspicious. And probably the last for you Tracy heads out there, unless you sign the petition to see if we could get him his own fanzine. But that was the straw that broke the camel's head. That was the last straw, the final straw, the needle in the hay, turkey in the straw. Yeah. It was never the same. And then I said, I'm done. Will I ever get back to the drawing board? Ever get back to the Dick Tracy world? Yeah, I have a lot of ideas rattling around up there about bad guys that I want people to see, that I want Dick Tracy to see. I want him to see these bad guys. And I want people to know that this isn't the end.